can check it back later, and I think we should be recording. Okay, excellent. So if you notice, the outline goes in order of the content that we did, and then when we get to the Constitution, I put it slightly out of order, but I think it'll make sense when you're going back and studying. So really just what is politics, what is government, that we'll get into. And then when you talk about getting to the Constitution, it is kind of like a pathway we're following. So like the European philosophical movements, the articles, why did the articles fail? And then with the Constitution, the different sides, right? So you have the Madison side, so Fed 10, Fed 51. You have the anti-federalist side with Brutus one. A little bit of the deliberations they made at the Constitutional Convention. And then the argument, or the anti-federalist, federalist argument here. And then just kind of going through some of the things in the Constitution, the amendment process. And then I know we talked about this in the first chapter, but we'll go back and we'll look at the theories of democracy. And then wink, wink, you need to know each of the first 10 amendments. You don't need to know any of the other ones, at least for now, but you do need to know the 10. My recommendation is flashcards or even like a 1 or 2 sentence line, something like that. Okay, great. So a couple functions. I mean, we could talk a long time about the functions of the government, but I think if you have like 3 to 5, you should be good. So a couple of things, couple functions is provide for the national defense. Okay, so when we talk about the government, it is, and I guess we could talk about like preserving order, right? Like what we talked about when we listened to the tapes from President Trump talking about Woodward. So I think preserving order is definitely a basic function of government. And so I guess we could add a couple ideas here. So this is like creating and enforcing laws, protecting citizens from domestic and foreign threats, things like that, right? The other thing is taxes, okay? Collecting taxes, spending tax revenue. And then the other thing that we could talk about is like socializing the youth, okay? And so this is something like you have compulsory education. A good example of socializing the youth is the exact reason why you have to take this class. You need this class to graduate because the state believes it's important for you to understand the functions of the American government and teach you about communism too. Trump warned you about me, but anyways. The other thing we could put is public services. This is kind of, I guess, related to taxes, but with public services, these are things like education, roads. I guess we could just put infrastructure. Okay, so it could be things like the DMV. We could do like food stamps. Yeah, things like that. Questions on basic functions of a government. Notice I didn't say democracy, I said government. Okay. Linkage institutions. So the definition is really they connect us, or you could say connect the people, the citizens, to the government, okay? And so the link that we see are what connects them. So you as an individual will very unlikely run for public office, but you can vote for someone to run and make decisions on your behalf. The other thing that we see is the media, okay? I can't go to Washington, D.C. every day or talk to different people to know exactly what's going on. So the media helps inform us and helps us understand what is going on, although it's not perfect. The other thing you can do is you could join a political party. So again, you probably won't run for public office, but you can still get involved. And so, I mean, not this year, but you could go to conventions, you could work at the, working at the polls is nonpartisan on purpose, but I think maybe working for campaigns, picketing, and things like that. And then the other thing, as far as linkage institutions that we talk about, are interest groups. Okay, so things like the NRA, AARP, things like that. Then as far as democracy, again, there are many components that make up a democracy. I'm just going to go over a few. One is an unknown outcome of elections. Okay, We don't want our elections to be like the Ukraine or not Ukraine, it was Belarus that had their recent election, or even, Putin winning by such high percentage of the vote. So we need an unknown outcome. The other thing that we have is we need effective participation. So you could argue maybe, the United States doesn't have the effective participation it needs, given less than 50% of eligible voters actually vote, but you do need people, the actual citizens involved. And then the other thing is informed citizens. I know we don't really think about the Postal Service much today, but think about it in the 18th century, the Postal Service was really important to the Founding Fathers because it was a way to stay informed and get information out to the citizens. And then the other thing is like consent of the governed. Okay, this is another part of democracy, and really all of these different things, even like the equity in voting. Okay, and so this is like the equity in voting is something that we as a country have worked on. African Americans voting, and then really that didn't really change till the civil rights movement. And then, women getting the right to vote, 18-year-olds getting the right to vote. Questions on part one? And I can't seem to set it. Devin, you're good. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. So getting into the Constitution. So it says considerations that influence formulation and adoption of the Constitution. Well, you first have to talk about the philosophies from Europe, because the United States was formerly a British colony. So you have to talk about the Enlightenment. And ultimately with the Enlightenment, we have a lot of ideas like freedom of religion. And so with this, you don't need to know the thinker, but in case you're curious, Voltaire was the one who proposed that if you have freedom of religion, you could prevent the religious war that had plagued Europe for a couple hundred years. So freedom of religion is part of it. And then different things like Montesquieu, and my French is awful, so I'm just gonna butcher this here. Okay, yikes. Maybe that's right. Okay, Montesquieu, separation of powers. You could even talk about like Locke with, I guess I'm going backwards here. Well, regardless, natural rights. And also consent of the governed. And so the other thing I would add with Locke too is this obligation to overthrow a government that breaks a social contract. So when the United States claimed that Great Britain was having us, the citizens, pay taxes, and then we're not represented in Parliament, that broke the social contract. So John Locke says you have an obligation to overthrow the government, and that's what the Founding Fathers looked at too. And then the last one I would say is like with Hobbes, because with Hobbes, really you have like fear of the mob and a need for things like elite class theory. Cool. Okay. And guys, at any point, and maybe I'm not, okay, good. I'm going to try and pay attention better here, but at any point, raise your hand, then I will stop, and then we'll get questions that way, I think. All right. Specific powers. So what were some things that the Articles of Confederation were able to do? Some things are declare war. They can make treaties. They can print money. They can maintain an army. But all of these are like if you get 9 out of 13 in Congress to approve, right? Which is very unlikely to happen. So ultimately, even though you have this, why did the articles fail? So you could say federal power had no ability to enforce the states. So there's not really much you can do there if you can't force the states. And this goes to no power to regulate commerce. Same type of idea. And really what we look at is the state legislatures maintained what you call state sovereignty, which means that they are basically like 13 small countries wrapped around with a bow. And it's more like the European Union and less of an actual like one nation. And so you get to say this another way, too much power. The states had too much power, ultimately. And then the one example that College Board needs you to know, which I think is a little bit reductive, but Shays Rebellion. Okay, so you have angry veterans who are losing property to pay new taxes, try to start riots, and Massachusetts asks the federal government for help, but they cannot get the 9 out of 13 states to agree to step in. Okay, there's other issues around that, but just understand that this is the main thing that was going on here. I think this one might be a good topic for like a free response question, knowing specifically the articles and then how they failed and even how they were fixed. And so I would recommend maybe going back and looking at number 5, weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, because it lays it out. Here's the problem, here's the solution. So I would recommend looking at that. Okay. So it failed, right? It didn't go very well. And so ultimately we're going to try and adopt a new constitution. And there were thoughts of totally scrapping it, modifying it, and ultimately coming together, they make this sort of large centralized government with separation of powers. But some things to be aware of. So like in Fed 10, James Madison talks about factions. Okay, factions are groups of immense passion. There we go, immense, yeah. Immense passion. And they cannot be destroyed, only controlled by a strong central government. Okay, and so ultimately what this is talking about is how to prevent hyperpluralism and mob rule. Okay, so we need a federal government. We also need to protect against these factions. And so that's really what Fed 10 talks about. We have gone into a lot of the documents. So it's likely that when you guys do the argument essay, it's going to ask you to use Fed 10 or Fed 51 or Brutus 1, things like that. So you need to know, especially these 3 documents and the Constitution. You need to know these. Fed 51, thinks separation of powers. And this is showing how separating the powers into 3 branches ensures that no one branch will take over and create an autocracy. And then I guess the other thing to add here too is that Congress is the most important, but we split it into a bicameral legislature. So it does not, I guess, hold too much power. Right? So again, think of the context Fed 10, Fed 51. You're trying to basically make sure that the people who would read about the Constitution, because no one was invited to the convention, they have an idea of if there are issues, we have things in place. So you won't need to worry about those issues, essentially, is what he's saying. Brutus 1, and really what Brutus 1 is getting into is that he has issues with the new Constitution because it will be the end of state power. The federal government will take over, especially with their power to create and maintain an army. So like the federal army would create a military coup And then he's also talking about clauses, right? The clauses that he has big issues with is necessary and proper clause, which you can find in Article 1, Section 8. And then he also has issues with the supremacy clause as well, because really it's just too much federal power. Questions on these three documents? Or, I mean, anything we've covered so far.
Mr. Bowman, will we have access to the Google Forms we submitted that like analyze these?
If you want a copy of your response, I thought I had put it on there. If not, email me and I'll send you a copy of your responses.
Okay, thank
Good
you.
question. Yeah, that's a good question. Good. Okay, so so these are part of the campaign to get the word out about the Constitution. And at the convention, what they actually talked about, so this Virginia plan, okay, this is for big states. It's meant to have representation based on population, okay? And so it would have a, I think in this regard, it would be a bicameral, but 2 houses based on population, okay? So again, think big states like Virginia, not necessarily geographically, although yes, in this case that works, but it's more the population, right? Virginia population-wise is a large state. And at this time, you know, the Southerners are assuming slaves are going to count for that too. New Jersey plan, think small states. And this was really representatives in a unicameral, so one chamber legislature. And it's 1 rep per state, regardless of population, okay? So you can kind of see the semblance of our Congress forming, right? So then the Connecticut Compromise is that we will create a bicameral legislature. And it's mostly the ideas from the Virginia plan, right? But the way we're going to do it is we're going to have a House of Reps. And actually, yes, okay. Notice how in the New Jersey plan, it says 1 rep, okay, per state. So I'll get to that with the Senate in just a second. But the House of Representatives, this is meant to be the lower house, meaning like the House of Commons, if we're going to compare it to the Parliament in Great Britain. So lower house is direct election by the citizens. And then this will be based on population. And then we're going to create a second house, the Senate, which is our upper house, or House of Lords. Okay, and this is indirect election by the citizens. You don't need to know this for the test, but basically it's where you vote for your state senator, and then your state senator will vote for your senator. Kind of convoluted, but getting back to like the Enlightenment ideas of fear of the mob, this is part of why that's here. And it would be 2 per state instead of 1. And that's our Connecticut Compromise. Questions on how this was formed or how it got here? Good, good guys. All right. Impact of slavery. So with slavery, 3/5 compromise. And what you guys need to know are the 3 parts of the 3/5 compromise is the North, or actually I'll start with the South. South agrees to pay taxes on their slaves, right? Because technically, even though they're people, under the law, they're considered to be property, right? And real quick, let's see. Yes, okay, good question in the chat. Yes, this is also known as the Great Compromise. Good, great guys. Yeah, send them in the chat too. That's a great way. Very easy to kind of steamroll online teaching here. So South agrees to pay property on their slaves. North agrees to enforce and put fugitive slave laws in the Constitution. And one of these days I'll spell Constitution correct. There we go. Okay. And then the last one is that slaves will count for 3/5 of a person in calculation of House of Rep numbers. It's not great English, but that's what it is. Questions on that? Calculator. Awesome. Let's see. Oh, yes, Oliver, thank you. Okay. And this wasn't part of the 3/5 compromise, but yes, they're also going to agree to ban the slave trade. 1808. I don't know if they agreed to ban slavery. I think it was just the slave trade, which created a whole nother thing. But yes, thank you. Okay, great. What were the main arguments between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists? Okay, so the Federalists, okay, they really believed in a strong centralized government. They believe that the Constitution, as is, will protect the citizens from mob rule, as well as a coup at the top to take away state powers. Let's see. Okay, and then the other thing really is part of this, and not necessarily something I think I mentioned in class, but they believe in a loose interpretation of the Constitution. And so what that means is that they are basically saying is you can interpret based on the spirits of the law, even if it is not explicitly in the Constitution. Right? Okay. Okay, great. And then your Anti-Federalists. Okay, they believed in a weaker centralized government in favor of state sovereignty. And then they also felt the Constitution would be the end of liberty because it did not do enough to protect states and the citizens from their governments. And part of this is, in italics, they believed in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Okay, and so basically because there wasn't enough discussion of freedoms in the Constitution, they felt there would need to be Bill of Rights. Okay, and this wouldn't be the first Bill of Rights. Okay, so they modeled an American Bill of Rights after the British Bill of Rights. And what's most important is probably the First and the 10th Amendments. Okay, because there is, nothing about free speech until Bill of Rights, B of R, and then nothing about protecting the state power. So the 10th Amendment, right, is anything that is not in the Constitution is up to the states. That's why voting is up to the states. Civil union up until this, the Obergefell v. Hodges decision was up to the states. And so public safety, that's a state issue in part because of the 10th Amendment. Questions on Federalists, Anti-Federalists?
Didn't Anti-Federalists also believe that like the government was kind of encroaching on their like personal rights?
Yeah, let's see. And I think, good. Yes, it was Talia that said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Talia, you're absolutely correct. So it's both the states don't have enough power, and it's kind of like the states understand that they're protecting freedom means that you have the right to privacy, that you can do things without the government stepping in, and that's exactly what they feared. might as well be under control of Great Britain if we're not going to have enough protection. Yeah. Good guys. All right, moving right along. Let's see. Okay, good. Yeah, and that's look, I will get there too, but when you talk about this loose interpretation of the Constitution, that's a great point. Think necessary and proper clause, also known as the elastic clause. Okay, think of like elastic, like in like gym shorts, right? So you can stretch it. And so things like the national bank, that is not in the Constitution. But if Congress feels it's necessary and proper, and they do have some banking powers, okay, good enough, national bank. So yes, great points. Good. So let's get into the actual structure of the Constitution here. So separating up the powers, legislature. Okay, so this is Article 1. Just real quick here. Okay. So all of the powers, okay, the powers of Congress, okay, they're in Article 1. And as far as the structure, okay, I'm actually just going to copy and paste, if that's okay with you guys for sake of time. Where did I put this? Okay, here we go. So here's the structure of Congress. Boom, there we go. And let's put that there. Okay. And then as far as the function is to create laws for the federal government, intervene in cases of interstate commerce. They will also approve treaties, right? That's the Senate that will do that. The Senate will also confirm justices and members of the cabinet, things like that, right? But they are meant, also can declare war. Well, sorry, let's get a few more. Coin money, standing army, power of the purse. Congress does a lot. They do a lot, and they're meant to be the most important branch, or most influential branch, right? Okay. As far as the expressed powers, okay, expressed means in the Constitution. So just getting, okay. And then your inherent powers are interpreted. Okay. So some expressed powers, and again, I'm just going to kind of copy and paste. And see, these are in the Constitution. As far as inherent powers, you could say like investigate other branches. We'll talk about things like grant funding. But some inherent powers, you could say things like creation of a national bank, things like that. Yeah. Okay, good. Questions on Congress? And delegated, for our purposes, is the same as expressed. Okay, so actually, I'm just going to get rid of that. Okay, good. And I would say with the inherent powers, this is like what, who said? Yeah, Lucas said, this is where you get the necessary and proper clause. Congress has the ability to pass any law they feel is necessary and proper. National Bank is a great example. Okay. So executive, structure of the executive branch, this is Article 2. Okay, so the structure, understand that POTUS, the President of the United States, is just one position, one member. He is the chief executive of this branch, but ultimately we do have other people, so we have advisors. So we can say, we'll say advisory boards, so then we can just include all these cabinets. The Joint Chiefs of Staff are technically under the executive, the White House staff, Different, okay, so you have like the Office of Management and Budgets, like the Human Resources. There's the National Security Council. All of these are under the executive branch. You could also put in here, like, just because it's more recent, it is cabinet, but Department of Homeland Security. So part of why President Trump is able to send paramilitary troops from Homeland Security is because the Department of Homeland Security is directly under the power of the chief executive. Okay. And as far as the function, this is to enforce the laws of the federal government. And if states are not enforcing the laws, the federal laws, the executive branch can step in. Okay. But again, enforcement. And then judicial structure. So this is Article 3. And it's very short. Article 3 is very short. But as far as the structure of the courts, Article 3 says you need to have a Supreme Court, which just means a top court, and inferior courts, lower courts, as decided by Congress. They talk about things like judges serve life terms and are confirmed by the Senate. And basically, as far as the function is to settle disputes between states, between federal and state power, etc. So understand, judicial review is not in the Constitution. And the reason I make a point to say that is because if you are asked on your FRQ, give me a power of the judiciary in the Constitution, you cannot say judicial review. Because that is not in the Constitution. And so it was created in Marbury versus Madison. Let me actually go on like a sidebar here on Marbury versus Madison. Marbury was denied his judgeship by the new POTUS, which in this case was Jefferson. The Secretary of State at the time was John Madison. I know it's hard because he eventually becomes president, but you should know if he became Secretary of State, likely to become president, at least in the early years. Secretary of State is the one who denies the judgeship. Okay, and then Marbury's all upset. He's really pissed off, and he says Marbury sues based on the Judiciary Act of 1789, asking SCOTUS, Supreme Court, for a writ of mandamus, just a mandate. I'm going to make you do something. Okay. And Supreme Court, SCOTUS says Judiciary Act is unconstitutional, and SCOTUS does not offer writ of mandamus. So Marbury, not a judge. Really convoluted, really difficult to understand, I think. Questions on Marbury versus Madison?
Is the writ of mandates a form of judicial review?
It is. Well, actually, no. The writ of mandamus is not the judicial review. The Judiciary Act basically gives the Supreme Court judicial review, but we don't want Congress to give other branches power. Imagine if Congress passed a law that said the president is now allowed to declare war. That's not a good thing. And so basically the Supreme Court said, you're not allowed to do this. To say it a different way, the judiciary is saying, if we give ourselves judicial review, that's okay. If Congress tries to do it, that's not okay. That's weird, but that's what happened.
So only they can alter anything.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Very good. Yeah, so Congress can't pass laws that say, you know, we're going to not have life terms for the judges or, you know, things like that. The only thing Congress can really do with the courts is they can reorganize the courts. But the law that was passed, the Judiciary Act, should not have been passed. So the paradox is this act gave the Supreme Court judiciary review. The Supreme Court said, hey, Congress, you can't give us that. And by saying that, that's judiciary review. It's kind of want to make your head explode, but you guys are doing a good job. Your responses look pretty solid. Okay, almost done here, guys. Any questions as we're kind of paused? And remember, I am recording this as well. So I know, like in the past, like when I posted it, students just like they don't watch the video; they just kind of listen to it, which you can obviously do. Great. Formal amendment process. And I'm going to recommend to you guys. There's one slide that I think is very effective, and if it is not in your notes, I would put it in your notes just because it really breaks it down easily. It's as this is loading, there it goes. Okay. It's a graphic organizer from the previous textbook. We're almost there. There we go. And one more. This one, slide 25. Okay, slide 25 really breaks it down. So let's put that here. Cool. Okay, formal amendment process. Most common way. So you would say 16 out of 17 amendments, okay, were made with this two-step process. Always a two-step process. Step one, you need 2/3 of Congress, which means you need the House, 2/3 in the House and 2/3 in the Senate. Have to do that. Step two is you need 3/4, which is pretty hefty, of the state legislatures ratify. So a couple of key words here. Okay, Congress approves, Senate ratifies. Very important that you have those key terms. Congress approves, Senate ratifies. Like I said, 16 out of the 17 have done it that way. And so 1 out of 17 times. Okay, step one, same thing. 2/3 of Congress. Okay, step two was actually 3/4 of a state convention, which means it's citizens chosen as delegates to vote. I told this to other students, this may be an inappropriate example, but it really works. Okay, the only time we ever used the state convention is when we brought alcohol back. So the way I always remembered it in high school for my gov exam is the Americans wanted the alcohol back so quickly they couldn't wait for the state legislature, and the citizens just got together and approved it. Okay, again, I know it's a little inappropriate, but maybe that'll help you understand. Now, informal. This is much more common. And when we talk about informal ways to amend the Constitution, the most common is SCOTUS. Okay, so we have like thousands of these. And so when we're talking about amending, we're talking about, as far as a definition, okay, this is a drastic change, more dramatic, or I guess more drastic than a law from Congress or an executive order from POTUS. Any questions? Okay. SCOTUS is one, and then part of why the informal amendment process is much more common, this is not necessarily like a way it happens, but we have changes in technology. And this is like a reason why, is because there are things that exist now, like like internet commerce. I mean, how do you explain internet commerce and like taxes on online marketplaces to the founding fathers? I don't know. Even things like net neutrality, right? These are things that, you know, alter the way we do things, and but ultimately it comes from a change in technology. And then the other thing that we see, why the informal is much more likely, it's easier to get, but also sometimes we have changes in public opinion. And oftentimes we will amend the Constitution with SCOTUS. So you could say SCOTUS and civil union. So, you know, 20 years ago, very, very few states allowed civil union for gay couples, and now it's legal in every single state because the Supreme Court stepped in. That is a drastic alteration to the way we do things. So there you go. Questions on amending the Constitution? Great, guys. So let's just go through this. I have a couple of things I want to give you for the Bill of Rights, and then that's about it. So let's start with elite and class theory. Okay, so this theory is that the most educated, or we'll just say educated, or we could say informed, wealthy celebrities are the best fit to govern. And I guess we could say, like, some examples that we see of this are the Electoral College. Okay, so prevent a mob from voting for the quote-unquote wrong person for president. Another elite and class theory is the indirect election of senators. Okay, people are not informed enough to make such an important decision. Okay, so same thing for Electoral College, right? Good. Now with pluralism, and by extension hyperpluralism, this is where groups work together, and here's your key word, compromise, in creating policy. And it's kind of like the theory is that this creates the best policy because it only works when factions compromise, right? And so it could go bad. Right, when pluralism goes wrong, leads to policy gridlock. Okay, so an example of pluralism would be, you know, a bill passed in Congress and signed by POTUS. Okay, that would be pluralism. Hyperpluralism would be where you have something like a government shutdown, which I really hope we don't have, but that would be an example. Or you could say like the failure of COVID stimulus, something like that. And then the last one is participatory. And this is really direct control of the government agenda by the people, and people vote in many elections, and yeah, that's really a lot of it. So participatory, okay, you can vote for your House of Rep, you can vote for local elections, governor, mayor, school board, city council, and then you can also do things like in California, initiative, where you can put a law on the ballot. That's how marijuana became legal. You can also do what's called a recall election, where you can vote out local officials. This happened with Gray Davis. That's how Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor, because we had a recall election. I always talk to the people when I go to Target that want to recall Gavin Newsom. They have a lot to say, and it's pretty interesting to hear their perspective. And It's only going to get worse for him. But anyways, questions on the theories here. All right. I'm not going to put all of them because I do want you guys to kind of see too, but I'm going to show you an example of what we'll say just expectations. This does not include everything. Just like a disclaimer, I guess. Let's highlight that. Okay, before I go into the Bill of Rights, are there any general questions that you guys might have? Do not be embarrassed.
I know that Article 1, Section 8 has a lot of like
Yeah.
content. So are you like, would you maybe have like a separate section just for that?
I would even tell you, I would recommend making a doc with all the documents we did and just like some lines on there. So you could do like Constitution and then it says like Article 1, Section 8, and then you put like a couple things down like bullet points. Because the way to be successful on an open note test, and I doubt you guys are really used to open note tests, you have to work on the preparation because yes, you can Google things, but the amount of time you spend on Google, it directly takes away time that you could be writing your essay. And you don't get any points for Googling. It's all about what's in the actual essay. And if other people prepared and you did not, they're going to have really stellar college level answers and you will not. And so that's kind of how, I don't know, it's like all the cream goes to the top, I guess. But yeah, that's what I would do. Doc of the documents. Yep. All right, let's just kind of rush through here. Amendment 1, tons of stuff. Speech, expression, assembly, religion, both establishment. So the United States was not establishment. That did not make sense. Will not establish a religion, which also means that there can be no religious requirements for running for office. And this is also expression of religion. Technically speaking, if you want to wear a colander on your head for your DMV photo because you are a member of the Church of Pastafarianism, it's no different than a hijab under the law. I think it's a little different, but okay. Expression of religion. The other thing here is petition for the government. Did I miss anything? Speech, expression, assembly, religion, petition. I think that's it. But this is what you should be able to do. You should tell me what the main pieces are, right? Right to bear arms. Technically, in the context of a militia, we'll get to that interpretation later. No quartering of soldiers. Right, so if the Marines knock on your door, you do not have to let them in. That didn't really amount to anything. 4 deals with privacy. And some of your like keywords here are no unreasonable search and seizures. Okay, good. And then as far as 5's got a lot too. So you have your natural rights, remain silent. You have eminent domain, which means that the government can take your property if they pay you for it. No double jeopardy, things like that. And technically, your right to due process, lots in 5. There we go. Good. Okay, 6 and 7 are a little bit repetitive. 6 deals with like juries and mostly defendants' rights. So if you're arrested, so we could say like, for example, right to counsel. Okay, and then 7 is like a trial by jury. So like 5, 6, and 7 go together a lot. 8 is excessive bail. And we'll say no excessive bail. And no cruel and unusual punishment. And 9 is when things are new, they are not automatically illegal. Congress needs to pass a law. So I would say think Google data mining 10 years ago. Google's been, data mining for a really long time, but that's a new thing, and it's not illegal until Congress makes it illegal. So oftentimes people say that the law is behind the technology. That's what they're talking about there. And then 10th is anything not in the Constitution goes to the states. And if you're a libertarian, this is like libertarian gold, right? That's what you want. Good. Okay. That's it. What I will do, guys, is I will post this video on Google Classroom so you can check it out. Let me actually pause the recording.